And also Jumong, kind of ancient Korea dynasty background, and Copy Prince, another kind of romance drama TV series. And these early K-dramas or Korean dramas have been exported to Japan, China, Southeast Asia, and even to Middle East. So if some Koreans visit like Middle East, like Iran or even Saudi Arabia, they will talk about some Korean dramas they actually had a preference for. Okay, so these are some Korean films that that I mentioned as the early movies that has been popular or as Korean wave, and these are Korean dramas that I talked about. So this is 대장금, which was very popular in China and Southeast Asia, and this is Winter Sonata, and this is kind of tragic story about this woman, had the first love, and she thought that he died in traffic accident, but he actually survived and had to live in different name and different identity, and she actually met him in 10 years, and then thought that he was different person, right? Because this guy had a car accident, he had lost memory of the past, so he didn't remember his past. So he lived as a different person. So they met actually, as a different identity, and they came to recover their past. That's kind of tragic and story, but also with a happy ending. And this drama has been very popular in Japan. And this is a street at the island of Chuncheon, at the island in Chuncheon. And actually in this island, this drama has been produced, and this drama has been featured. So many Japanese tourists actually came to visit this island to experience or explore many locations and many spaces that actually the actor and actresses has kind of stories in it. Okay, so they will even have a statue for the first kiss they actually had in this island. Okay, so this particular island has been kind of popularized as tourist attraction. As of today, it's having the most popular tourist attraction in Gangwon province. Okay. So Korean dramas has been popularized not only in terms of tradition or history, but also in terms of modern romance, kind of reviving the kind of classical love stories. Okay. So here's the question: why Korean culture has become so popular out of other Asian cultures? Maybe Japanese culture, Chinese culture, or Vietnamese culture. They are also interesting and has stories of modernization and tradition. But why South Korean culture has become particularly popular, not only in Asia, but also in Western countries? Before I go onto my theories of why Korean culture has become popular, let me ask you your opinion. Okay, so why do you think that Korean culture or Korean wave has become popular, especially maybe in your country?
I don't know. I think in my country, Korean culture is well affected because of the music in Korea, and movies have been attacked in my country, and many people from young to old people really likes music, Korean music, and Korean movies, and I think that is why the Korean culture is affected deeply in my country.
So why do they like Korean music and movie? So what's the reason, do you think?
I actually I'm I quite concerned about the K-dramas, the TV series, and the variety shows. So, in my opinion, the format and the plot and the content of the variety shows and the scenarios of the dramas is really attractive, really makes sense. Maybe they have some like over romantic points or like sweet scenes in there, but like they they meet our needs, like they supply our demands of our daily life.
Okay, so you mentioned some romance, and you mentioned something sweet, right? Romance and sweet, and that kind of satisfies the demands of your people, right?
Yes.
And okay, that's good. And any other opinion? So maybe to make it simple, you can ask yourself if you like some parts of Korean culture or Korean music or Korean movies. Why, why do you like it, or what particular you like about Korean culture?
I think many Vietnamese are interesting in Korean culture, especially Hallyu, is because Korean culture and Vietnam culture is kind of similar.
Okay.
So we are curious about your culture, so that's why we're interested in the movie, the drama, and the music.
Okay, thank you. So that's a good point. You might find some kind of similarity and commonality between Vietnamese culture and Korean culture, but a slight difference, right? And maybe may I ask you if you have something you don't like about Korean movies or dramas? Is there something you don't like, you kind of dislike?
Because there are some points in K-dramas that have like a lot or it overdo about the romance or romantic situations compared to the reality. So I think it's like it would make like a decent number of teenagers like like they not like being really like they're not acting properly in their life.
Okay, that's a good point. So there is over exaggeration of romance or emotion, right, in love in Korean dramas. So the young people might be a little bit confused between the reality and their illusion in drama, right? So that's a good point. I mean, that's kind of good side, positive and negative sides of Korean dramas. Korean dramas is attractive because it's appealing, over exaggeration of romance. But for that reason, it can be kind of confusing and it could be misleading the young people, right? Making confusion between reality and dramas, right? Okay, you have something to say? Okay, so thank you. So you have mentioned many good, interesting points that which actually overlap with my theory. But generally, we can say Korean culture or Korean wave can be regarded as the place where East meets West. Okay. Okay. So Asia and the West actually meets in Korean, South Korean culture. As I mentioned, South Korea has been kind of exceptional from other countries in early acceptance and reception of American culture, right? They had very heavy influence of American pop culture in South Korea, right? And at the same time, South Korea has been very particular in maintaining Confucius culture, as we have learned, right? In the part of modern history, Korea actually claim that they were actually exceptional in maintaining the essential Confucian or Confucius culture, right? Whereas Qing dynasty has become much more barbarian, much more exotic. Joseon dynasty maintained very the essence of Korean Confucius Asian values, right? And also, if you compare South Korea with China, or Vietnam, which actually have gone through socialist revolution, they actually revolutionized, for example, family structure, right, or social relations. Whereas in South Korea, they actually had made kind of natural transition from Joseon dynasty into capitalist society while maintaining Confucius culture, and as we have learned from the class of religion, they have maintained some kind of shamanistic or even some mysterious parts of rituals, right? So you will find very detailed elements of kind of Asian culture that has remained and survived, right? When we compare especially China and Vietnam and other rapidly industrialized countries like Japan, which has been much more individualized, which has become much more westernized. South Korea has become kind of unique in making early reception of American culture, but at the same time maintaining this essential Asian culture based on family hierarchy and hierarchy between gender and having some kind of respect for all people, right? Or making kind of emotion at the center of human relations, making very tight social groups, right? Having friends and relatives and families all around them and very closely. We also learned about how Korean churches has become the center of social universe, right? Making lots of social connections. And that also reflects this kind of combination, right? Combination of Western religion into Asian cultural social groups, right? Making close emotional friends with your networks. That's why Korean churches has become popular and much more widespread in South Korea than in other countries, right? So maybe you can compare the popularity of Korean churches in terms of the concept of combination of East and West. Maybe at the same time, we can take another look at Korean wave in terms of the combination of Eastern and Western culture. So maybe we can think of it as a combination of tradition and modernity, right? Tradition in some sense maintaining Asian values, and at the same time modernity with economic developments, but at the same time Western ideas of pop music and maybe for example, using cosmetic products and doing plastic surgeries, like in this kind of physical appearance has become much more modernized in South Korea, and also in their fashion, in their lifestyle, in their housing, right? They have experienced much stronger modernity or Western modernity than compared to other countries. So that's why South Korean culture is appealing to Asian countries because they have this combination of tradition and modernity, right? You feel kind of similar in terms of tradition, right? But at the same time, you will be kind of attracted by the modernity that they have developed. And for those young Western people, they feel kind of comfortable because they have American style or Western styles of expression and kind of art or kind of music, but kind of blending in some traditional elements which they find very unique and different. Okay, so for American and Western European young people, they say Korean culture has brought them some kind of ideas of very strong emotion that they have actually not experienced in their country, right? In their own country, they will have, kind of individualistic ideas about group and people and relations, right? Whereas in the case of South Korea, they have very condensed or very tight, intense emotional relations and emotional expression, right? That actually reflects on some kind of attractiveness to Western countries. So in this regard, Korean culture or Korean wave can be attractive to different cultures for different reasons, right? To Western culture, to Asian cultures for different reasons, but based on the same combination of tradition and modernity. So let's take a look at the tradition first. So as for tradition, I'm mentioning actually family relations and structure and social cohesion, like social solidarity, and also emotional, emotional sorrow, which can be translated to Han, and also melodrama. I'm kind of getting used to this new technique, so bear with me. So once again, 펜으로 하고, 아닌데. 이거 어떻게 하면 확대가 되지? 이걸 넣으면 되나? 맞다, 이거지. 네네. Okay. So I'm getting used to this new technology, so sorry about that. Anyway, going back to the reason of tradition. So family, as we have learned, Korean families has more remains of extended family and respect for elders and some kind of hierarchy between parents and children, and the relations between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, for example, has some kind of hierarchical relations. But here, once again, I like to point out that in Korean dramas, they actually emphasize on traditional aspects of Korean families, which is attractive to foreign audience. But sometimes, as I've emphasized, there could be mismatch between reality and what's actually displayed in Korean dramas. For example, in Korean dramas, they will show many extended family living together, right? Grandparents and children and grandchildren live together and have their dinner together. Like, so there will be 7 or 10 people eating together at the same table, dinner table, right? But as we have learned, South Korean families has become much more nuclearized, and then has become much more separate. So most young people do not live with the parents anymore after they get married and have children, right? So this kind of Korean drama actually emphasize on extended family and family values and hierarchical relations, especially between husband, parents, and daughter-in-law. So that kind of shows some kind of Asian family values, but once again, there is always mismatch between what's actually changing or what's actually happening in reality in South Korea and what's actually displayed as kind of example or as kind of ideal image of extended family or family relations. Okay, so here is an image of Korean family as kind of traditional, but once again, you might not be kind of confused between the reality and the image of Korean families. And maybe same with emotional sorrow and melodrama, right? So in this kind of melodrama, Korean men especially are described as very romantic and committed to the relationship, right? And sacrificing. So that's why Korean men in Korean dramas has become much more attractive. Right? You can think of Mr. Bae Young-jun, which was the main actor of Winter Sonata. And in the case of Japan, he has become very popular, and because for those Japanese women, especially middle-aged women, they thought Japanese men are regarded as kind of cold and individualistic. But in this kind of drama, they regarded Korean men as kind of masculine and romantic. Okay, so this kind of Korean drama actually brought about some kind of nostalgia. Nostalgia is passion for the past or kind of longing for the past. So for those middle-aged Japanese women, they remember their past as kind of romantic relation in terms of romantic and classical relations, right? Whereas Japanese men has become too much modernized and individualized. Whereas in this kind of drama, you know, especially Mr. Bae Young-jun or the actor is kind of performing this new persona of sacrifice, right? Or love, you know, falling in love forever, okay? Which is not, you know, always true, or which is not always, you know, reflective of Korean reality, you know. As in many other parts of the world, Korean men also becoming much more selfish and individualistic in their relations, you know, less sacrificing and less committed, right? So there is always mismatch between reality and idea. But once again, Korean dramas or movies has been successful in displaying this ideal type of man and ideal type of relations, or whether it's romance, whether it's friendship. Okay, so here is how Korean drama has been popular in Japan. Okay? And what about China? So what's attractive to China? So as I mentioned, in China, they have gone through socialist revolution, maybe you know, similar in Vietnam, but less intense in terms of dissolution of family or family structure or traditional relations. But in China, they have experienced very rapid dissolution of traditional family structure, and the authority of the family has been disregarded, especially during the Cultural Revolution. If you imagine Cultural Revolution in China, it was all about, you know, demolishing the authority of the family, authority of teacher, authority of professors, and so on, right? And through this Cultural Revolution and socialist era, China have gone through and have lost some kind of traditional values of family, okay? And if they watch Korean dramas with showing extended family and some kind of patriarchal order between parents and children, between husband and wife is very caring for her husband, and, you know, kind of taking care of her husband, you know, they also find some kind of nostalgia for the past, you know, that they have lost during the socialist process, socialist you know, era. Okay. So maybe Korean family with traditional values or kind of patriarchal, you know, order has some kind of appealing to Chinese viewers. You know, I'm talking about some middle class Chinese viewers. Okay, and as we have discussed, these Korean dramas and films can be analyzed as centered on emotionalism, you know, kind of emphasis on emotion. Okay, so 네. Okay, so in terms of emotion, Korean dramas and Korean films have been described as showing very intense and very strong emotion, right? Which in some aspects, some critics might say that if you show or if you reveal too much emotion or too much romance, that's not actually artistic, okay? In terms of art, in terms of artistic expression, you actually kind of suppress your emotion, or you have to kind of have limit your emotion. So the expression of emotion must be kind of sublime or kind of ambiguous, right? So that you open up for the interpretation. But compared to this kind of artistic genre of emotion, Korean dramas and Korean movies has been kind of known for expressing emotion very strongly. Okay, so this emotion has become very direct and realistic expression, whether it's love, whether it's sorrow, whether it's tragedy, and very diverse emotions has been kind of extreme expression. Okay, and then even though it was extreme, it has been feeling realistic because maybe in Korean society and Korean history, as we have learned in our class, South Korean people as a nation has kind of these experiences of Japanese colonial occupation and Korean War and poverty in 1950s and 60s and suppression of dictatorship and very dynamic changes of democratization and economic development. So very dynamic and diverse experiences actually made this strong and extreme emotion feel much more realistic because those producers or directors of Korean dramas and TV series actually have their own experiences, right? And also they have experiences of their parents. So this kind of very strong emotion of, love and tragedy and sorrow, sadness and suppression, all can be expressed as very realistic because it has been there in their daily lives in their very recent past. So these historical experiences actually can be said the reason for why Korean dramas or Korean films have strong emotionalism. Also for the melodrama, okay, very typical romance, right? Kind of sacrifice for love, and maybe sometimes a woman from the very poor family becomes, fall in love with very rich CEO or businessman. It's kind of typical story, right? So that's why it's called melodrama. It can be from some critical points, it can be regarded as kind of tear jerking, like asking for you to cry, and then they will actually artificially set up drama for you to actually cry, right? So some people don't like this because they regard this melodrama as too much romance, too much emotion, but it's appealing to many people in the world. And especially people in the West, they find this kind of melodrama or romance a little bit outdated, right? Because in modern dramas of Hollywood, they will have very fast developments of romance, right? And expression of physical relations and physical romance. But in Korean dramas or Korean films, they will have very modest developments in romantic relations and very repressed expression of love and relations. And also in Korean melodrama, so this kind of men with sacrifice and commitment have expressed a new masculinity of Asian men, whereas in the past, especially in Western narrative, Asian men has been described as less kind of masculine. This new genre of melodrama in Korean movies and Korean films have expressed kind of new masculinity of men in Asian values. Okay, so in terms of tradition, I have explained that this family structure and social relations and expression of strong emotion based on their historical experiences, which was very tragic and very sad. And So that's why they call it Han, kind of unexpressed sorrow in their mind, deep in their minds. So this all together actually supported the idea of tradition of Korean dramas and Korean films. Okay? Maybe in other parts of Asian world, like Vietnam or China or Taiwan, have maybe similar elements, like historical experiences of colony or war and poverty and so on. But maybe South Korea was different in having early exposure to American culture, okay? and therefore Western modernity. So let's take a look at the other side of Korean wave, which can be summarized as modernity. So modernity actually means Korean society or Korean culture has been based on economic prosperity, and therefore in Korean dramas, they will show some kind of luxurious consumer culture, right? Or consumption culture. And also in terms of modernity, Korean dramas and movies have maintained some kind of moral criticism as well. So this kind of attitude, new attitude towards modernity in combination of traditional values have created some kind of unique popularity of Korean wave. So in terms of consumption, so if you watch Korean TV or Korean dramas, you will see very diverse consumption cultures, right? Whether it's food, whether it's fashion, whether it's leisure culture. So for example, from Korean TVs, Korean food has become very popular in many parts of the world, and they have their own ways of, moderation and localization as well. So sometimes, as we have learned, they have Koreanized Chinese food, right? And they also have diverse multicultural food culture, like Italian food in Korean. For example, Korean pizza has been popularized through Korean movies and has been exported to Chinese market as well. So you will see very developed and diverse Korean consumption culture, whether it's the way they get dressed, or the way they eat, or the way, how they enjoy their leisure time. All this kind of diversity of Korean consumer culture has been kind of popular through Korean movies and Korean dramas. Okay, and in this context, maybe you can think of conspicuous consumption when we learned from the middle class culture or middle class theory. So in this kind of Korean dramas and movies, you will see the kind of exaggerated display of high class lifestyle, right? Once again, there should be a mismatch between reality and ideal description of lifestyle in Korean dramas. So if you watch Korean dramas, you will see very luxurious house and very expensive, car, and they will go to very expensive restaurant, right? But that's very different from daily lives of ordinary and middle class Korean people. So maybe this photo on the left side is kind of typical image that you have from Korean dramas. You will see they have very luxurious furniture, they have even stairwell to the second floor, and they have piano, grand piano on the floor. As far as I know, I have no friends who live in this kind of house from my friends and from my family, my relatives. Maybe this is maybe less than 1% of Korean people might live in this kind of house, right? But by displaying this kind of interior design of Korean house, it is actually appealing to people in Asian countries, showing that Korean people actually, or Korean families are having this kind of house, so they will have some kind of admiration of consumption culture or lifestyle in South Korea. Same with expensive car, like they will drive Ferrari and expensive Benz. But I mean that's true. Some people might drive this kind of foreign produced cars, but that's also far from the very reality of ordinary people. Okay, so by showing this kind of high class lifestyles, it's kind of creating some kind of lust or desire for, especially for those audience in developing world, in China or in Southeast Asia, which is also, once again, the mismatch or misunderstanding between reality and the kind of imagery or illusion. That's why when some foreign wives from Southeast East Asia countries, when they get married to Korean men, and maybe in the early period of 2000, they were kind of disappointed to get married, to find out their husband actually lives in the countryside and has a farming family instead of this luxurious lifestyle. And same with physical appearance. Korean men and women look very beautiful and handsome on TV, so they have some kind of imagery of handsome and beautiful Korean men and women. Same with North Korean refugees. When they actually arrive in South Korea as refugees, they had very high expectation, even illusion of Korean culture, Korean consumption, and their physical appearance. But when they arrive in South Korea, and they'll find there is a mismatch with illusion, and they might be quite disappointed by what's actually happening in reality in South Korea. Anyway, that's how they have become popular or appeal to the global audience. And also, in terms of modernity, Korean dramas or films have very kind of refreshed some kind of modern critical ideas by revealing some kind of hypocrisy or moral decadence of rich and powerful people. So if you watch Korean dramas, rich people are described as kind of deceptive and kind of doing bad things and betraying each other and beating each other even, right? So, I mean, it's also another exaggeration of, high class morality, but it kind of gives satisfaction or emotional satisfaction to viewers of the middle class, right? Maybe ordinary people might be envious or jealous of high class people, but when Korean dramas and films kind of exaggerate that people of high class and rich people are doing kind of bad behaviors, immoral behaviors, they might feel kind of satisfaction, right? They are rich, but they are not, nice people. Okay, so hypocrisy and moral decadence of rich people has been kind of a very popular theme and sometimes they will actually portray a woman from poor family background, right? Or Cinderella. You can describe her as Cinderella is in a fight against this rich family, right? And then the happy ending will bring a kind of romantic relationship between this poor woman and rich businessman, and making it happy end for the couple, right? By defeating the immoral people in the rich family. So moral criticism can be regarded not only for Korean audience, but for the global audience as well, could be a point of popularity. Okay, and in more artistic films, which is appealing to rather Western audiences, like film festival or film competitions, we have renowned Korean directors of Korean films, but they point out that Korean films are good, better in describing kind of morally ambiguous characters. Whereas if you watch Hollywood movies, there will be very obvious division between hero and villain. So there is kind of strong, clear dichotomy of good and bad, black and white in Hollywood movies, right? So if you watch Hollywood movies, there will be hero, kind of saving the world, like for example. Whereas in Korean films, the main characters are sometimes kind of ordinary, someone like you or someone like your neighborhood, but making, kind of different decisions, or making mistake and doing bad things, betraying people, but making moral reflection on himself. So there is kind of ambiguity in terms of moral characteristics in Korean films. That's kind of appealing to the Western audience with its own originality and creativity. Okay? And in terms of modernity, maybe nationalism can be another sales points of Korean films and dramas. For example, we can think of JSA, Taegukgi. Taegukgi is a movie about the brothers fighting on the on the different sides of South and North Korea during the Korean War. And also, Descendants of the Sun has been very popular in China. So, what's unique about nationalism or patriotism expressed in Korean films and Korean movies can be also related to the expression of emotion. Okay? So, nationalism in Korean movies and dramas have been based on very strong emotion and relations of family, brothers, and love. So it's based on very intense and strong emotion. Therefore, you feel that nationalism or patriotism, love of your nation or sacrifice for the country can feel much more natural and voluntary. Okay, so it's from the bottom of your heart. Whereas in other parts of the world, nationalism or patriotism can be seen as kind of forced from the above by the government. Okay, maybe in China, if they have some expression of nationalism or patriotism, ordinary people might feel a little bit tired of hearing of nationalism because nationalism has been so kind of forced and imposed by the government through their education, through civic propaganda and campaigns and so on the popular, or even in the popular media, right? Whereas in Korean movies and Korean films, nationalism or patriotism might feel much more realistic and much more natural based on emotion and relations. So maybe nationalism and patriotism can be regarded as another segments of modernity. Okay. So as a whole, we have learned about. I mean, this is just one interpretation. I mean, the Korean wave is changing, and there could be several interpretations of the reason why Korean culture has been popular. Right? And it has, as I mentioned, it has different reasons for different countries. But this is a little bit rough generalization of my idea on why Korean culture has become popular. Okay, so the combination of tradition and modernity can be, regarded as maybe one reason. So let's take a look at how Korean wave has some kind of produced some positive effects in Korean society, okay, or for the status of Korea as the nation state in the worldwide. So first of all, of course, there has been improvements of global recognition. Okay? That means when Koreans actually traveled before in the past, since they look like Chinese or Japanese, people in the world would ask Korean people, or say ni hao or sayonara or Japanese word. So are you Japanese? Are you Chinese? It's kind of something that Korean people were tired of hearing when they actually travel abroad, right? Because Korea was not actually known as much as China and Japan, since they look like Chinese. Then they will say ni hao. But nowadays, if Koreans travel overseas, they will or do business overseas. Some foreigners will say 안녕하세요 in Korean language. Okay, and then they will talk about some of their favorite Korean movies, some of their favorite Korean pop music groups, right? So that kind of opens up a conversation about Korean culture, right? And then actually you kind of develop some kind of personal conversation and business conversation, so that helps Korean people to be recognized much better than before, much better than in the past. Okay? So in the past, you actually had to explain, and then they will ask whether you come from South Korea and North Korea, and then you have to spend some more time, how South Korea is different from than North Korea, because North Korea has been much more recognized for their violence, their kind of dictatorship worldwide, right? Whereas South Korea has been less known than North Korea. But nowadays, South Korean occurs, are much more positively known than North Korea. Okay? And secondly, I mean, as we have learned in the historical process of South Korea has experienced very strong influence and even cultural dominance by China and by Japan in the early 20th century, and later on by the United States of America, right? So this foreign cultural influence has been continuous in South Korea, right? And therefore, they have kind of continued to have kind of cultural complex, right? Complex about Chinese culture as superior to Joseon dynasty, and cultural complex about modernity that was imposed by Japanese colonial regime, and a complex in terms of economic developments and modernity along with United States, right? But as you can imagine, with these effects of Korean wave, they actually are overcoming this kind of historical complex, okay? And the third point is that thanks to these effects of Korean wave, we are actually, Korea actually have been successful in attracting foreign tourists and students to Korea. So nowadays, like if you imagine 1980s, 1990s, we didn't have many foreign tourists and foreign students in Korean universities. But nowadays, we are more successful in attracting foreign tourists and students to Korea. And in political terms, nowadays, this Korean wave and K-pop stars are functioning as kind of diplomatic personnel. So, for example, when Korean presidents making a state visit to foreign countries, they will bring K-pop stars along with them. And for one example, we actually mentioned that Korean culture or Korean wave has developed some positive relations with Vietnam, because even though South Korea has some kind of tragic or tragic relations during the Vietnam War, right? But this Korean wave has kind of made kind of smooth transition to better future and positive relations with Vietnam, because Vietnam is, especially young people, are accepting Korean wave and Korean culture more positively. Okay, so do you agree? Okay, thank you. And especially in regard to North Korea, these days we are having increasing number of North Korean refugees. Okay, or you can say North Korean defectors. But nowadays, those North Korean refugees, whether they are young or old, they are having more prior knowledge and information of Korean culture, because nowadays in the local market in North Korea, they are having circulation or widespread consumption of Korean dramas and Korean music in DVDs or in USB. And so young North Korean people have early exposure to South Korean culture through this Korean wave. So Korean wave can be regarded as kind of cultural bridge between South Korea and North Korea nowadays. So maybe if you imagine, future relations between South Korea and North Korea, and maybe potential reunification between North and South, maybe Korean wave and Korean pop culture can be regarded as kind of very positive and efficient means of communication, means of maybe mutual understanding. And lastly, let me point out that Korean wave has been very effective in expanding to other industries, not only in music and film industry, but also involved in food industry. So Korean food industry has become much more popularized. So many Korean food companies have been getting benefits out of this Korean wave. And also you can, as I mentioned, tourism has been developed in terms of industry. And also, as Korean actors and actresses or Korean musicians has become much more popular in other countries, they are actually helping to sell Korean cosmetic products, and Korean companies are doing better business in exporting their cosmetic products, and also plastic surgery, which is also called K-beauty. So both cosmetic products and plastic surgery can be regarded as the industry of K-beauty. Okay, so this K-beauty industry is actually making more profit based on these effects of Korean wave. And also in terms of education, nowadays many more foreign students are trying to learn Korean language, and they are coming to Korean universities for their studies. And also you can imagine internet media using different SNS, different means of communication can be another potential area of developments in industry. And lastly, so we have learned about some positive effects of Korean wave, but there is some kind of negative aspects of Korean wave has been criticized and has been developed very recently. And first of all, in Japan, there has been some kind of anti-Korean wave, especially by some right-wing activists or right-wing political party. They try to create some kind of antipathy or anti-Korean sentiments about Korean culture. Because in some sense, they are anxious over the expansion of Korean cultural contents in their media. So it's one way of protecting their own authentic culture. But this has a lot to do with some kind of historical disputes, especially over the potential dispute on Dokdo Island and political issues on reparation for comfort women and drafted laborers recently. So these historical events has kind of brought some kind of cause for this anti-Korean wave, which is mainly, kind of organized by right-wing activists in Japan. So Korean wave is bringing in some kind of negative response in other countries. Like in Japan, also in China, since 2006 and it's even today, Chinese authorities of media and communication has imposed some kind of government policy of limitation on Korean wave. Okay? So in other words, they are actually restricting the amount of Korean TV program or Korean TV airtime, mainly in order to protect their own homegrown contents, TV contents. Okay, but also for the case of China, they are using this limitation on Korean wave in political negotiation and political disputes. So when they have political diplomatic dispute with South Korea, they will put limitation on the Korean wave and Korean TV programs in China. Okay? So it's like the same way they are actually putting the limitation or prohibition on Chinese tourists coming to South Korea. Okay? So when they have kind of political dispute with South Korea, they will use this kind of weapons like limitation on Korean TV program and prohibition on Chinese tourists into South Korea. In that way, they can make it kind of means of political negotiation against South Korean government. And thirdly, industrialization of Korean wave has been kind of criticized because when you are making it as kind of industry, Korean culture can be manufactured. We have seen the documentary film about training school for K-pop stars, right? So they will learn from the same coach. They will have very routinized, programs. So all those musicians or singers and dancers will have similar, almost identical styles or music or art, right? In that way, they will become much more standardized. right? They will become much more identical, but at the same time losing their own originality or creativity. So these critics actually point out Korean musicians and Korean artists are becoming less creative, less authentic, and becoming kind of similar to each other. So they might say that you can really see much different between different girl groups, for example, right? So many girl groups look like same music, same dance, same physical appearance even. So another example of industrialization of Korean wave was actually took place in mid 2000. So they had kind of repetitive themes of Korean films of kind of melodrama or kind of sacrificial love. So that kind of made less attractive and appealing to global audience. So there was a kind of decline in export of Korean movies in mid 2000. And lastly, nowadays, as we have seen in the documentary film, South Korean government is heavily investing and supporting the export of Korean wave, right? That's actually helpful in expanding and spreading Korean culture across the world. But there's a problem with government support because the government is, in some way, by doing so, the Korean culture itself is actually represented by some kind of shallow aspects of pop music, right? Whereas Korean culture has much more diversity or authenticity other than Korean pop music, right? So other than Korean pop music, other aspects of Korean culture can be disregarded or unknown to global audience. And at the same time, there's problem of focus on Korean wave and Korean pop music and films because the government support and subsidies and support is limited, and especially it is decreasing for the other domains of Korean culture, which is not actually appealing to global audience, or which is less, kind of appealing to global audience. Maybe if you can think of Korean traditional performance and music, and more authentic areas of art, like play, like literature, and so on. They are receiving less government support than before. So here is another problem of balancing government support for different aspects or domains of Korean culture. Okay, so that's it for today. So I appreciate your participation, your opinion about why Korean culture has been popular in Vietnam. I learned a lot. And I'm wondering if you have any question? Yeah.
The guy behind me asked about the right-wing activists.
Okay, in Japan?
Yes.
So what about?
We are not really know about these kind of activists.
Mm-hmm.
If they are from politics,
Political party? Yes, there is some political party or belonging to right-wing activism, but this is not limited to political party, but also there is popular culture of young people emphasizing on patriotism. But this right-wing version of patriotism in Japan has some kind of particular relations with their own historical past, which is Japanese imperialism, right? So as in China or Korea, we actually have criticism of Japanese imperialism, and we demand for their historical apology and historical reparation for their invasion of Japanese imperialism, right? But actually, those right-wing activists kind of justify the expansion of Japanese imperialism in the early 20th century. Okay, so this is not limited political party, but also widespread to kind of young people, also popular culture as well, by creating their own stories and movies and even pop culture. Okay. Any other question?
I have a question which is not really involved in the lesson. I want to know, I'm kind of a fan of Daejanggeum, and I have watched that movies like a 1,000 times, and I want to know, I really want to know more about her, more about the achievement and her works, and so I Google it on the internet, and all I search is, I see is just the information about the movies. There's no historical documents about her. So I wonder whether she's a real person in history or not.
Well, as far as I know, she is kind of historical fiction. Okay, so I mean there should be someone like her in the historical context, but this is very dramatized version of Korean royal servant as a cook, right? So I think you can really find historical data of Daejanggeum. Okay, she is purely fictional figure.
That's a shame. I really like her, and
Okay.
I want. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if there is no more questions, see you next week.